Today on the channel, we're talking about the Blue Snowball, the USB microphone we all know and love. You've seen it, you recognize it, you might even have one on your desk right now. We're going to be exploring why it's so popular, what it sounds like compared to some other popular microphones in the field, and why, in my opinion, I don't think it's a very good microphone at all. I don't have a scientific, peer-assessed reason for why the Blue Snowball is so popular, but there are three factors that I can assess for its popularity. Firstly, the price. The Blue Snowball is cheap. It retails for $80, and if you get the Snowball Ice, like the one I bought several years ago, it's only about $40 to $50. Your stereotypical interface, the Focusrite Scarlett Solo, is going to be around $100, plus or minus some, depending on which one you get. And speaking of interface, the Blue Snowball is a USB microphone, which means that you don't have to purchase an XLR cable, an interface. You just need to get a USB cable, plug it into your computer, and you're ready to go. Because of its price and ease of use, the Blue Snowball has garnered a reputation for these things, which has caused it to be recommended more by other people and so on and so forth. And it has developed quite some name recognition over time. But the fact is, you get what you pay for. I've set up the Snowball versus the competing mics so that the diaphragms on both mics are located so that my voice will hit them at the same time and distance, so that when I go into post-processing, all I have to do is just add some normalization, and I will have two recordings of the same piece of speech that we will then be able to A/B and see how the different mics pick up the vocal characteristics differently. No further processing has been done aside from normalization, so this is just going to be a look at the raw audio gain match so that there's no trickery with one being louder or one being quieter. Today's competitors are the bedroom musician favorite, the Audio Technica AT2020, as well as the live sound workhorse, the Shure SM58. Additionally, in this test, I have included the Lewitt LCT040 small diaphragm condenser microphone for reasons that I will explain later on in this video. So let's get to the good part and compare some results. So this is the difference between the Audio Technica AT2020 and the Blue microphone at about a distance of 6 inches, I would say, roughly. We're going to see how they sound when compared to one another. We're going to see if the sibilance picks up any differently between the two. And if we really start to project next to them, we're going to see also if that affects them at all. Like, we get a little louder than our normal selves. We'll see how that is, you know? All right. Testing, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. This is the difference between the Blue Snowball and the AT2020 at about 6 inches. Okay, we're now recording about a foot away from each microphone, and once again, we're going to see what the difference is between the two of them. Once we compare this in post, and we make sure that the gain has been matched between the two of them, so there's no deceptive difference when we assess the loudness. Now, I'm primarily curious to see how the room acoustics are going to pick up a little differently, and also just once that proximity effect is accounted for, if the pickup is going to differ super differently between the two of them. Alrighty, this is the Blue Snowball versus the Shure SM58 at a distance of about 6 inches away from me, and a little bit of more like 2 centimeters away from each other. Once again, I have matched up the diaphragm, so my voice should be hitting both of them at about the same time on each of them. And once again, I sure am seriously curious to see the difference in how the two microphones handle sibilance. Anyhow, once again, we've got the trusty old Shure SM58 and the Blue Snowball. Okay, we're now standing about a foot away from each microphone now. Once again, this is the Blue Snowball versus the Shure SM58. And we're just going to kind of A/B across these two mics and see the difference in the two, how they pick up. It's a jolly old time. We're having a good laugh here. Ha 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 ha. Yeah, and also I am kind of curious to see the difference between sibilance at this distance, What's the results going to be? And how will they handle a louder, more opportunity to pick up echoes? All right. This is the Blue Snowball versus the Lewitt LCT040. We're at a distance of about 6 inches away from each of them, and we're going to see how they compare to each other once we get the results. Now, the Lewitt is a small condenser microphone, is a small diaphragm condenser microphone, I should say. And as a result, the diaphragm is smaller in circumference and diameter. What a shock. Now, what difference does this make? Well, it has different characteristics in its pickup, so we'll see what happens when we look at this in post. Now, let's see how they handle that wonderful succulent sibilance once it hits the diaphragm of both of these microphones. Oakley dokley, we're now standing about a foot away from each of these microphones. I forgot to do the projection test, but honestly, I don't really care that much. It probably won't even show up in the final footage, oh well. Anyways, this is me talking about a foot away from both of these microphones. Once again, we've got the blue Snowball versus the Lewitt LCT040. And hee ha 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 ha, big chuckle reveal coming on in a moment here. Anyway, sibilance, sibilance, sibilance. I can hear the air conditioning going on, which is an unfortunate oversight on my end, but hey, I still think this will be a pretty good test video. La-di-da-di-do. Hooray for microphones. Yay. I don't think it takes an expert to assess that when compared to our other competitors today, the blue Snowball just does not sound as good. While I wouldn't say the other results produced radio-ready vocals, they each sounded good enough to the point that some minor tweaks might have been needed in post to get it to the point where I would put it as a finished voiceover, but they didn't sound glaringly bad. While in each example, the Snowball just has this canned, tinny, low-quality sound to it that I just can't stand. So what's the deal with the Snowball? The first thing to point out is the frequency response curve on the Snowball. Where the bump is located on the Snowball's frequency response, it's just a head scratcher, honestly. Like, I honestly don't know why it exists there, and it just makes the vocal sound nasty and weird. Speaking of which, trying to find documentation on the Snowball has been tricky for me, because any other microphone, when you purchase it, usually it comes with a document that'll give you all sorts of specs, like the frequency response, the self-noise, the sensitivity, whereas the Snowball, you just kind of get the the frequency response chart and the polar pickup pattern, and that's pretty much it. If you look on the spec sheet too, you'll also notice that it says you can only record at 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz, but that's only something audio geeks need to worry about. Well, I'm an audio geek, and I'm worried about it. So in everyday use cases, yeah, that's not going to be too big of an issue. But if you're recording vocals, or if you're trying to get high quality field recordings or instrument recordings, you're going to wish you had higher fidelity to deal with here. And when researching this topic, I kind of was looking up why record in 16-bit versus 24-bit, and I realized that pretty much everyone today is recording in 24-bit. Like, all the discussion on whether to switch from 16-bit to 24-bit was happening back in like 2010, the mid-2000s, which led to another interesting discovery. I was reading a review from Sound on Sound about the blue Snowball, which I then discovered was from 2006. And judging from the review and the pictures in it, it would appear that the design and the construction of the Snowball has not changed at all. So part of the reason that it doesn't really sound as good as it could be is because we're using technology that's over a decade and a half old at this point. And when we open it up, things get even weirder.
So the blue Snowball, once you've taken out the screws in the back of the unit, what hides behind this grill? What lies inside this capsule that's bigger than my fist? The answer will surprise you, because it's literally just a teeny tiny little diaphragm there and an extra spot for another capsule on the model, depending which one you have. That is literally it. That tiny little thing is the internal microphone of the blue Snowball. And then surrounded by this piece of foam right here. All that space on the circuit board, like if you look, it's pretty much just nothing. There's some capacitors there, the microprocessor, and then but like look at all that empty space on the PCB. So yeah, when you buy the blue Snowball, that is what you were paying for.
So as you can see, the reason I decided to include the Lewitt LCTO40 in the test is because the blue Snowball is also a small diaphragm condenser in a gigantic, bulky, clumsy, unintuitive package that could really be this big if we wanted it to be. So in conclusion, the blue Snowball does not sound great, and while you could probably use it for voice conferencing, remote work, school, maybe even streaming, you're really selling yourself short here by strictly using it. And while it may be your only option if you're really on a tight budget for bedroom music, I would highly recommend saving up a little bit more and going with something that has better recording quality than the Snowball. Even if you can't afford an XLR setup, just get a better sounding USB mic that's not from the early 2000s. In conclusion, you should make the Snowball like a snowball and throw it out.